On a bright afternoon, filled with laughter, music, and celebration, all eyes were on the bride as she made her grand entrance. The hall sparkled with lights, the tables were draped in gold, and guests whispered about the wealth and glamour surrounding the event. But while most people were caught up in the beauty of the wedding, one woman stood quietly in the corner. She wore a simple dress, nothing flashy or expensive, and carried herself with calm grace. To some, she seemed out of place among the designer gowns and glittering jewelry. And soon, a group of guests decided to make her the subject of their whispers and cruel laughter. They smirked at her outfit, whispered about how she didn't belong, and even joked that she must have wandered into the wrong celebration. The woman, however, did not argue or defend herself. She smiled politely, keeping her dignity, while their words cut deeper than they realized. What no one knew was that behind her modest appearance, she carried a truth that would change the entire mood of the evening. You see, this simple woman was not only the wife of a man who loved her deeply, but her husband also happens to be one of the most powerful and wealthiest men in the city. He had chosen her not for her status, not for her looks, but for her heart. And when he noticed the way people were mocking his wife, he decided to act in a way no one could have imagined. As the music played and the bride basked in attention, the atmosphere shifted. The billionaire husband arrived, quietly but with the presence that drew every eye. His gaze swept the room, and in a matter of minutes, he would do something that left the entire wedding party speechless. Because not only was he about to stand up for his wife, he was about to make a move that would shock the bride herself by taking control of something she thought was untouchable. And in that moment, the laughter stopped. But what exactly did he do? Stay with me, because the turn of events that followed would leave everyone stunned. The guests couldn't help but stare as the billionaire stepped into the hall, his presence commanding quiet without a single word. He walked with calm confidence, his eyes briefly finding his wife in the corner. She gave him a soft smile, the kind that spoke of trust and unshakable love, even while others had tried to belittle her. To most people at the wedding, she looked like an ordinary woman, someone unnoticed in a crowd. But to him, she was everything. And that difference in perspective was about to turn the entire evening upside down. What the guests didn't know was the history between the families. The bride's company, a thriving business she was proud to show off, had been struggling behind the scenes. The groom's relatives had stretched their finances thin for the lavish wedding, hoping to create the illusion of stability. And while the bride wore her confidence like a crown, she had no idea that the future of her company was already slipping into the hands of someone else. The woman in the simple dress knew none of these details. All she felt was the sting of being mocked for not fitting in. She wasn't there to outshine anyone, nor to prove her worth. She had lived her life quietly, valuing kindness over appearance, and had never cared much for material things. Yet it was exactly those qualities that had captured the heart of the man who now stood in the center of the room. Whispers started spreading quickly among the guests. Some recognized the billionaire instantly, others only realized his identity after hearing murmurs of his name. A wave of unease moved through the hall as people began to wonder why was he here and what it meant for the celebration. The laughter that had once filled the air was replaced by silence and curiosity. And then, with one unexpected gesture, he began to reveal his plan. The air inside the wedding hall grew heavier as the billionaire's presence settled over the crowd. The music softened, conversations paused, and even the bride's confident smile seemed to falter. No one had expected him to show up. He was a man known for making quiet but decisive moves in the world of business, the kind of man whose choices shaped entire industries. And yet here he was, among people who had just mocked the woman he cherished. The bride, still radiant in her gown, tried to carry on with her celebration. She believed the evening was hers, a moment to show her success and beauty to everyone she knew. For her, appearances had always mattered more than anything else. That's why she had gone out of her way to invite powerful families, business partners, and wealthy friends. It was supposed to be a showcase of her influence. But deep down, there was an insecurity she carefully hid. The company she inherited from her family was facing serious challenges, problems she had kept from most of the guests. The billionaire's wife, in her modest dress, knew none of the bride's business troubles. All she knew was how uncomfortable the stares and whispers had made her feel. Yet she carried herself with quiet dignity, the same dignity that had first caught his eye years ago when she wasn't trying to impress anyone. He had fallen in love with her simplicity, her kindness, and her strength in moments when others would have broken. Around the room, whispers began to grow. Guests leaned toward each other, wondering what connection the billionaire could possibly have to this wedding. Some even began to realize that his gaze wasn't on the bride or the groom, it was fixed on his wife. And in that silent exchange between them, it became clear something was about to change. The hall was still, as if everyone was holding their breath, waiting for what might happen next. The billionaire moved closer to his wife, every step echoing through the silence. Guests who had laughed at her minutes earlier now avoided her eyes, unsure of how much he had seen or how much he knew. The bride tried to keep control of the room, clapping her hands and urging the band to play louder, but it was useless. Attention had shifted completely, and no music could compete with the tension that now gripped the air. The man stood tall, his expression calm but unreadable. He whispered something to his wife that only she could hear, and her eyes softened, though she still looked uncertain. It was clear he had come not just as a guest, but with a purpose. Whispers swept through the crowd like wildfire. Was he here to confront the insults? Or was it something bigger, something tied to the bride's company that many in the business world had been quietly discussing? The bride's father shifted nervously in his seat, his hand tightening around his glass. He knew more than most about the company's fragile state and the powerful investors circling around the business. If the billionaire was here, it could only mean one thing. He was ready to make a move. And if that was true, then this wedding, meant to be a symbol of wealth and power, was about to become a very different kind of spectacle. The guests leaned forward, eyes fixed on the billionaire. His wife touched his arm gently, as if reminding him of her presence, of her heart. But the room could sense it. He was preparing to act. And when he did, it would not just silence the mockery, it would change the course of the evening forever. Just as the billionaire seemed ready to reveal his intentions, another unexpected shift shook the hall. A man in a sharp suit, one of the bride's business partners, stood up suddenly. His voice cut through the silence as he raised a glass, pretending to toast, but his words carried a nervous edge. He announced proudly that the bride's company had just secured a groundbreaking deal that would guarantee its future. The bride smiled wider, clinging to the moment, but the billionaire's expression didn't change. His eyes narrowed ever so slightly, as though he already knew more than the partner was letting on. Guests applauded politely, though whispers buzzed again. Many wondered if this deal was real or just a distraction. The bride, however, looked directly at the billionaire, her smile almost daring him to challenge her claim. It was no longer just a wedding celebration. It was a battle for pride, reputation, and power. The billionaire's wife felt the tension rising like a storm. She squeezed his hand, sensing the weight of the moment. She had never cared about business games or public displays, yet she found herself standing at the center of one now. And though she wanted nothing more than to slip away quietly, she knew her husband would not let the cruel laughter she endured go unanswered. Then came the twist no one expected. One of the guests, a senior employee from the bride's very own company, spoke up hesitantly. His voice cracked as he admitted that the so-called deal had already fallen through, that the company was on the edge of collapse. Gasps rippled through the crowd. The bride's smile froze, and all eyes turned once more to the billionaire. It was clear now. He hadn't just come to defend his wives. He had come because he held the key to the future of the bride's company. And whatever he was about to do next would leave the entire room stunned. The room seemed to freeze after the shocking confession. The bride's face turned pale, her perfect smile gone in an instant. All the whispers, the laughter, the mocking of the simple woman now felt painfully out of place. Everyone waited for the billionaire to speak, sensing that whatever came next would decide the fate not just of the company, but the legacy of the entire family. At last, he stepped forward. His voice was calm, steady, but carried a weight that filled every corner of the hall. He revealed that, quietly, without the bride ever knowing, he had already